Hello, everyone. This is Rabbi Ari Sachs of Congregation Beth Mordechai coming to you with another edition of this week's online Parsha class. I'm so glad you could join us for this week's class. And what we're up to today is Parashat Vayera, which is the fourth Torah portion of the entire Torah, the fourth Torah portion of the book of Genesis, the very first book of the Torah. And we are, as I mentioned last week and for the past couple of weeks, we're focusing this year on the middle part of the Torah portion, the second third of the triennial cycle, so that we're able to read the entire Torah portion in 3 full years. And so in the second third of this week's Torah portion of Parashat Vayera, we have a very famous story, as with most stories within the book of Genesis. It is a story of the angels of God, or the messengers of God, or simply messengers, who come to Lot in the land of Sodom and Gomorrah and are there to tell him that it is time for you and your family to leave. But in the midst of their visit to Lot, before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, which we do read about in this second third of the Torah portion, that they are confronted by a group of men from Sodom who basically beckon Lot to kick out the men who he is harboring in his own home, who he is giving shelter to. And what we're going to do is we're going to read a little bit about what exactly happens and the kind of language used by the men who came to knock on Lot's door, exactly what it is that they're saying and what its implications are. And so we're now going to turn to Sefaria.org. To the beginning of the chapter 19, which is the first chapter of the second third of the triennial cycle. Vayavo'u shnei hamalachim Sodoma, and two messengers or two angels came to the land of Sodom ba'erev, at night. Ve'lot yoshev b'sha'ar Sodom, and Lot was sitting at the gates of Sodom. Vayar Lot, and Lot saw them. Vayakom likratam, and he came and went to greet them. Vayishtachu apaim arza, and he he made his face fall on the ground as a sign of respect, saying, "Welcome into our land." Vayomer hine na Adonai suru na el beit avdechem, and he said, "Behold now, my lords, turn aside, velinu, turn aside, I pray, into your servant's house," meaning asking them to come into his home. Velinu v'rachatzu raglechem, and so that you shall lie down and that you shall be able to wash your feet. V'hishkamtem v'halachtem l'darkechem, then you'll wake up and you'll go upon your way. Vayomru lo, and they said no, ki varachov nalin, but we will abide in the broad place all night. So that these messengers are going, or Lot is greeting the messengers, saying, "Come to my home and stay with me." But they're saying, "No, we're just going to stay out here in public." But then Lot urged them greatly to come with him. Vayasuru elav, and they turned in unto him. Vayavo'u el beito, and so Lot eventually convinced the messengers to go with him to his home. Vayas lahem mishte umatzot afa vayochelu, and he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and then they ate. So we have here the first, you could say, confrontation in the story. This one, this is not a very contentious confrontation, in that the messengers are saying, "No, we don't want to necessarily come with you. We want to stay out here." Now, maybe they're just don't want to be in a position. Perhaps they do not feel it is their place to tell Lot to ask them in. Maybe they feel fine being outside, but Lot, seemingly for whatever reason, urged them to come with him. Now, you could say that maybe he urged them because he wanted to be a good host, saying, I want to be able to join you. I want to be able to host you. And so he's doing it out of the pleasantness of his heart. But that idea of urging him, Vayiftsor Bam, has a very uh, um, it has a connotation of being hurried, in the sense that he is very concerned about whether or not the messengers are going to stay with him. And what is the reason for his concern? And that's where we're about to continue to, what we're just about to get to. Terem yishkavu, but before they lay down, ve'anshe ha'ir anshe Sodom, and the men of the city, the men of Sodom, nasabu al habayit, mina'ar ve'ad zaken kol ha'am mikatzeh, that they encompassed the home around them, both young and old, meaning that these men were both young and old, seemingly all the men from Sodom, and that the entire nation came from every quarter to this house, to the house of Lot, and with these men. The question is, why are they there? What is the purpose of gathering all of the men of Sodom? What is so big about this event that they're all going to gather at Lot's home? And then here's the kicker. Vayikra'u el Lot, and they called to Lot, Vayomru lo, and they said to him, Ayeh ha'anashim asher ba'u elecha halayla. Where are the men who are staying with you this night? Hotziem elenu, bring them out to us, v'ned'a otam, so that we may know them. So that we may know them. Here is perhaps the reason why Lot was so anxious for the men to stay with him, because he knew that there was not only going to be a crowd that gathered around the strangers, but that when the crowd will gather around him, that they're going to what is described here as know them. So the question is, what does that term actually mean? And for that, I want to turn to another source which uses a very similar story, in which you have a stranger who comes upon a land, who comes upon into a city and is invited into a home, to see another example of this term of v'ned'a. And so now we're going to turn to Judges chapter 19, verse 22. And we'll back up a moment to verse 20. Vayomer ha'ish hazaken shalom lach. And the old man said, peace be unto you. Rak kol mechosrecha alai, rak birchov al talan. Howsoever, let all thy wants lie upon me, only lodge not in the broad place. Similar, in the same manner that the messengers had said that we want to live out, we want to be outside, and then Lot urged him to come inside, so too is the old man telling this guest, who happens to be going with his concubine, that they should come into his home and they should not lie out in the streets. Vayviehu leveito, vayavo lachamorim vayarchatzu raglehem vayochlu vayishtu. And just like in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, that all of the travelers' belongings, all of his donkeys, that they were cared for, that he ate, that he drank, that he washed his feet. And then, Hema metzivchem et libam, as they were making their hearts merry, v'hinei anshe ha'ir anshe v'nei v'liya'al. Behold, the men of the city, certain base fellows, nasabu et habayit, that they surrounded the house. This term nasabu is the same word used in the story we just read about in Sodom and Gomorrah. Mitzidapkim al hadalet, and they banged very hard upon the door. Vayomru el ha'ish ba'al habayit hazaken lemor, and then they spoke to the man, to the owner of the house, the elder one, and they said, Hotzei et ha'ish asher ba el beitecha v'neda'enu, and that you should bring out the people, the man from your house, so that we may know him. Now, because this story from Judges harkens so closely to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, that we have to see them as kind of having a similar trope here, that you have the people coming, the men coming to this man's house and saying, give us your strangers so that we may know them. Now here comes the idea of knowing, in that we already know from the earlier stories in the Bible, particularly when Adam and Eve come together, that the word yada, the root of the word vinedau, meaning that they knew them, that it has a sexual connotation. And so that in some capacity, this group wants the strangers to come out so that they may undergo some kind of sexual act with them. Now, in the title of this video, I've described it as rape. The truth is, we can't necessarily see rape, see that the term rape isn't used particularly here because it is a root for also having sex. So how do we know that it's something that is being forced upon them? And I think that we can understand rape from the context because of the fact that, number one, there was a fear of what would happen if these men were laying out in the street, that they needed some protection. Number two, that there's this idea of all of the men of the town coming forward and gathering around, encompassing the entire home, as if it's creating a very dangerous situation. And so any sex that would happen in this moment is one that seems to be one that is violent. And in fact, if we read later on in the story of the book of Judges, that in that story, that the man actually gives over his wife to, or his concubine to the men, that they undergo these violent sexual acts, that they rape her. And then she is totally distraught. And in fact, at the very end, a very sad scene is when the man actually kills his wife, and then breaks up the body parts and sends them to different parts of the land, saying, "This is what happens when you are allowing a town to become so unruly." So that there is this violence accentuated by the kind of attitudes that are made towards the individuals who are coming into town. And the question really is why? Why is it that there is this violence placed against people who are coming into town? And for that, I want to turn to the Ramban. I want to turn to Nachmanides, a medieval commentator who speaks a little bit upon this issue, upon this moment in which the men of Sodom come and they force themselves up, or they try to force themselves upon the messengers who come into the land. And so we now turn to the Ramban. You can follow along in the English here, but I will be reading from the Hebrew and then translating as I go. V'neida'a otam, and about this phrase, and we shall know them. Kavanatam lechalot et haregel mibenehem. Their intention was to stop people from coming among them. Kedivrei rabotenu, as it says, as our sages taught in Sanhedrin 109a, Ki chashvu shebe'avur tovat artzam shehi kegan Adonai yavo'u sham rabim. That, as our rabbis have said, for they thought that because of the excellence of their land, which was as the garden of the eternal, many will come there. So we have here a very articulate explanation from the Ramban, from Nachmanides, about why there is such violence directed at these strangers for coming in. Meaning, what is it that they're doing? And what the Ramban is picking up on is that a couple chapters early on in Genesis, in chapter 13, Lot decides to settle in Sodom and Gomorrah because of the fact that it is a beautiful land, that it is full of riches, that it is full of this great bounty. And as such, he wants to settle there. And the fear seems to be that when it comes to anyone coming into a town, when it comes to any foreigner, any stranger coming into the place that you consider to be home, that you are worried, you are scared in a sense that they are going to come and take over the goodness of the land. As it says, it is Kegan Adonai, that it is like a Garden of Eden, that all this great bread sprouts forth from the land. And because of the richness of the land, that if you allow foreigners to come and take it, that you're going to lose possession of it. In fact, the rabbis understand Lot as being unique insofar as he is able to come and journey and sojourn in the land because he was said to have brought his own riches with him. Meaning he wasn't going to need to work the land. He wasn't going to need to take riches away from the people who already lived there. He already had enough for himself. And as such, there was no fear that he was going to come and take the land from the people who lived there. Yet, if we turn for a moment back to our text in the Torah, even though Lot may have seemed to be a stranger who was fine to live in the land, it seems like he wasn't fully accepted. And Lot went out unto them to the door and shut the door after him. Vayomar al na achai tareu. I pray, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. Do not ask me to turn over these messengers to you. Hinenali shte vanot asher lo yad'u ish. And this is a very difficult part of the text. We could have a whole other session on the fact that in this moment, Lot is offering his daughters to be put instead of the men. And given what we know later on from the book of Judges, that what happens when you give over your wives and your sisters and your daughters, that they will become not only traumatized by the events, but eventually in Judges, that they will actually die because of it. And so knowing that Lot actually does this willingly, offers his daughters, is a very troubling selection of this story. But in any case, Otsiyana eten alechem, that I'm going to take them, give them unto you, ve'asu lahen ketov beinechem, and do with them what you please. Rak la'anashim ha'el al ta'asu davar. But rather, just for these men who come into my home, please don't do anything to them. Ki yoken ba'u batzal karati. For they come under the shadow of my roof, they come under my protection. And here's a key, because this is now the people of Sodom talking directly to Lot. Vayomru gesh hala'a vayomru ha'echad ba lagur, that this man is coming to sojourn in this land, i.e. Lot has come to be here. Vayishpot shafot, and now he's going to play judge. Ata nera lecha mehem vayifteru vayish balot me'od. Now we'll deal worse with you than with them. Vayikshu lishbor hadelet. And they pressed the sword upon man, even Lot, and they drew near to break the door. In other words, what this line tells us is that even if you are said to have given permission to enter into the land, that when you come to the land, when you are living in a place that isn't necessarily your own, that it's hard to ingratiate yourself in with the people, for the people to believe that you belong with them, that you are one of them. No matter how long you may stay in a land, that you may never be seen as being one of them, especially when you stand up for something that you believe in. Because whether it's in the Bible, or I think even in present day, that our country, for instance, has a great history of accepting the stranger, of bringing in travelers from outside of the country, from anyone who needs a homeland to come to America and to live here. In fact, my ancestors came here because of that promise. I would not be here and would not be an American if it wasn't for the fact that America was, in a certain sense, welcoming to people to come into the land. And yet And yet, no matter it is what you may do, because you were not one of the original people who lived here, if you stand up for something, especially one that may ruffle feathers with those who have already lived here, that you'll always be seen as a foreigner. And when someone is seen as a foreigner, they're seen as someone who is strange, who is an alien, who does not belong there. And when you do not belong there, then you're considered to be less than. Meaning, I think as human beings, we have a very, an amazing ability to be kind and compassionate, to be caring, to be understanding, to be good people. But generally speaking, we're only good people to those who we care about, to those people who we see as within the borders of our accepted people. And unfortunately, what happens, whether it's because of nature, whether it's because of our own choices, for whatever the reasons that we're not going to get into, human beings have a tendency to create boundaries whereby this group of people is great, is wonderful, they're my friends, they're the people I care about, and the people on the outside are not. That the people that are not in my circle, that they are able to have violence against them, that they're liable to be raped because they're not one of mine. And in fact, this text is seemingly saying that we at times do violence specifically to those others so that they will not become like us. That if there is a fear that these strangers may come in and influence us in any way, then seemingly we have the right, according to the men of Sodom and Gomorrah, to be able to do violence unto them in ways we would not do into members of our own family, that we can do violence unto them in order to make sure that no one else comes and no one else enters our circle. And maybe that is the reason why God eventually wanted to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Because at the very root of the evil of Sodom and Gomorrah is the evil of making your borders so strong, so permanent, that you can never see anyone else become a human being, to become one of you. And that they even, not just for the messengers, but for Lot, they never saw Lot as one of them because they were going to do worse unto Lot for keeping these men safe. And so I think that the lesson for us is that whether we are in a position of power, whether we are in a position of need, to always be aware of this dynamic of who is in and who is out. And in whatever way that we can, to avoid the evil of Sodom and Gomorrah by saying, is there a way that I can accept my brother and my sister? Is there a way for me to see this person as my brother and my sister? And I believe that if we do that, if we're able to open ourselves, open our hearts, open our congregations, open our towns, open our places of business, open wherever we find ourselves to people who we would not consider to be like ourselves, that it is at that moment that we truly fulfill the promise in God's destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, that my people shall always be open to all peoples, that my town should be a town for all peoples, that as in the words of the prophet Isaiah, my house should be one for all peoples. And so I want to thank you for joining me for this class. We'll see you again next week with the next Parashah. Take care and Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.